The 1980s, Rosanne Cash. For this podcast, we turn to the 1980s and talk a little bit about Rosanne Cash, who, in my opinion, is somewhat of an enigma when it comes to country music and the female artist, because she had a far from conventional rise to fame, given her famous namesake, and that in itself makes her an interesting contender for one of these podcasts. An artist who achieved fame, but not perhaps in the way you would expect from being the famous daughter of Johnny Cash, in this case. Born to famous country singer Johnny Cash, she followed in her father's footsteps and she toured with him after graduating high school in 1973, and that's where her career began. And now, Cash released her debut album, Rosanne Cash, in 1978, but here's the sticking point. It wasn't released in the USA, it was released in Germany, and it didn't break through in the US. In fact, the German record label that released it actually contacted her, presumably because of her namesake, to record an album. She did so, but it didn't make waves in the US. She was born in 1955 then in Memphis, Tennessee, the oldest of four of the Cash children, and they are, of course, most famously known as the children of legendary country music singer Johnny Cash and his first wife Vivian Librato. Now, Johnny Cash and Vivian Librato divorced in 1966. Rosanne Cash was 11 years old at the time, and she relocated with her siblings to Ventura, California to live with their mother. And of course, as you would expect from her father, she inherited a love of music, and upon graduation from high school in 1973, she joined her father's tour as a wardrobe assistant and a background singer. She then headed to London, England, so already a different route into country music. She worked for CBS Records over here during her time in London, which was funded by her father. He pulled the plug on her partying here in London, in the UK, and as Buffwack and Ullman explain, she then returned home to attend Vanderbilt University in Nashville. But after only a year in college, she headed back out to California to study method acting at the Lee Strasberg Theatre Institute. So we're hopping all over the place here with Rosanne Cash, and this may be something you wish to explore. Is it part and parcel of being the daughter of somebody so famous as Johnny Cash? Is there something at play here? Now, as we've already mentioned, Cash eventually signed to the German-based Arolia label and travelled to Munich in Germany to record her debut album, which again didn't make any waves in the US. But she went on and met her first husband, Rodney Crowell, who helped her to shape her career and to record many of her big hits. And it was soon after she recorded her album Right or Wrong, her first American album and her first commercial success, that she discovered she was pregnant. And like many women in country music, she didn't let this stop her. She continued to work. She went into the studio during this time and she recorded a second album in 1981 called 7 Year Ache. So there is another point to talk about. You know, women obviously have this role as mothers. They get pregnant, and this can often affect their careers. How so in this case, you know? Rosanne Cash didn't let that stop her. She carried on and worked through it. But did she have to, you know? Should she have been more accepted at that time? Her career was certainly on the rise, but there was tension in her personal life, and she struggled with substance abuse, and finally sought medical attention for that in 1984. Now, Bill C. Malone talks in his book Country Music USA about the career of Rosanne Cash, and he describes her in quite a nice way, really. He says, as the writer of at least 2 books, numerous short stories, and tomes of social criticism, as well as a participant in various humanitarian campaigns, Rosanne Cash has stood virtually alone in the country music world. And I think that is a nice way to sum up her career and the really kind of side steps that she's taken towards country music. She is so different to any other female artist, and it's not a surprise given that she grew up in the late 70s, early 80s as an artist, in a time when country music was changing and becoming far more open to the various different sounds and approaches of artists. And, you know, as a female in country music, you could start to talk about your own experiences in your music, and you could really talk about issues that were never spoken about prior to that. And that's an idea that is explored a little bit further by Buffwack and Oberman in Finding Her Voice, which is a book about women in country music from 1800 through to 2000. And in this particular book, they talk about artists such as Mary Chapin Carpenter, who is a contemporary of Rosanne Cash, and she kind of wrote the same sort of music as Rosanne did, you know, presenting the life and times of women and their struggle and their own experiences. In Rosanne Cash's case, her experiences with drug and substance abuse into music, and they made a lot of success out of it. You know, and when you look at these artists compared to the likes of Patsy Cline in the 1960s, it seems very, very tame, Patsy's career. And similarly, Taylor Swift's career in the 2010s, which you'll come on to learn more about in the next podcast. She's writing about high school sweethearts. She's writing about her 20s and being lost in a world. It appeals to a different audience completely to the music of Rosanne Cash, and that is something that you might wish to explore, having listened now to this second artist podcast covering Rosanne Cash and her career in the 1980s. Have a think about the questions that I've already mentioned, and write a response to this podcast and to Rosanne Cash's career. You can find a lot of information about Rosanne, given she is the daughter of Johnny Cash, so you might want to look into that a little bit further. But do write your feedback, comments underneath this podcast as usual.